Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger channel. I am your host as always, Steve Hall, and we are going to go over the takeaways from episode 137 with Mike Israetel. So let's get straight into those takeaway points. Takeaway point number one is according to Mike, a downset, and I say according to Mike because many other people might have different interpretations. This is the interpretation I have, and we use at Revive Stronger. But Mike Israetel has this interpretation of downset, so I just want to make that very clear. Other people might have their own way of using a downset. So for Mike, a downset is where you reduce the load to remain within a repetition range that you're targeting so that you can continue to provide sufficient volume. So for example, if you've had 3 sets within a 6 to 8 repetition range and you're due to do another 2 sets, but your reps are starting to fall well below that range, you might reduce the load by 10 to 15% so you can continue to do some reps within that repetition range. So it's just a way to allow you to get in some more high quality volume. Takeaway point number 2 was a really interesting chat that we had on the podcast, is that a lot of people are worried that they're neurotic. Now, if you think about what you're doing and you have a think about, is this reasonable? Is this sustainable? And is this optimal? Have a think about each of those points, reasonable, sustainable, and optimal. And then you can work out whether or not you're just being neurotic or it's actually improving what you are doing. The example Mike gave was kind of like crossing the road. If you're looking left, looking right, and then going, then that's probably something that is optimal because it's very efficient. It's sustainable. You're only looking left and right a few times. It's very reasonable. However, if you're looking left, right, left, right, left, right a million times over, then you can't check off all of these things. It's not optimal. It's not really reasonable. You're going to be blocking the road for a while. You're going to be looking a bit strange. And it's certainly not sustainable. You're probably going to get a very tired neck. But guys, that is something you can have a think about whenever you're doing something and you're worried maybe you're becoming a bit neurotic. Have a think whether it's reasonable, sustainable, and optimal. Takeaway point number 3 is that there are not specific foods that are good for body composition. There's a whole variety of wholesome, really nutritious foods that you can consume that are good for body composition, but there's no food that you can pick out and go, that food is particularly good for body composition. There's a whole range of foods. It's very difficult to isolate one food. Picking out blueberries, say, and you'd be like, well, what about strawberries? What about raspberries? What about blackberries? What about cranberries? And you can't make a good argument that blueberries are somewhat special against all these other berries. So just have to think about that. Wholesome, good foods, healthful foods that we all know, they're the ones that are good for body composition, not any specific one food. Takeaway point number 4 from Mike Israetel is that insulin sensitivity is probably slightly upregulated around training. When you think about it, you've created a demand for carbohydrates because you've somewhat depleted them during your session. Now, you haven't depleted your entire body's worth. That's going to be near most impossible. However, you have created somewhat of a deficit. So then this creates somewhat of a demand. And so having some more carbohydrates around your training, somewhat biasing them there, around 60% of maybe your carb intake around your training session is probably not a bad idea. Takeaway point number 5, and this was something new and exclusive that Mike hasn't really talked about much before, is picking exercises that have a good stimulus to fatigue ratio. So we think about exercises that provide us a lot of bang for our buck, essentially. So we had the discussion of like deadlifts. When you're new to lifting, you can get a lot of bang for your buck for deadlifts because they don't fatigue you massively because you're not that strong yet they produce so much full body hypertrophy because there's so many muscles involved. However, further along your training career, you're much, much stronger. Now, the stimulus to fatigue ratio kind of counterbalances one another. You get so strong and you use so many muscle groups that it creates so much fatigue that potentially it isn't quite worth it. So you have to have a think about specific exercises, where you are in your training career, what the fatigue to stimulus ratio is for that particular muscle group. So guys, hope you've enjoyed these takeaway points, and I really, really hope you check out the full episode of the podcast. The quote, our favorite quote from today's podcast, is that for trainees who haven't really got their training to click yet, searching for that optimality is a real bad idea. So wait to search for optimality. get a lot of your ducks in a row before you ever think about what is quote unquote optimal for you. So guys, hope you've enjoyed these takeaway points. As always, give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe to the channel, share this around with all your friends. Cheers and revive stronger.